The setting sun painted the Arizona sky with hues of fire and blood, mirroring the tense atmosphere that hung over the small town of Redemption Creek. The hot, dusty air was cut by the anxious murmur of the crowd gathered in the central square. Rough, sweating men, with dusty hats and hardened gazes, jostled around a makeshift platform. It wasn't cattle, nor land, nor gold that was being auctioned that day, but lives. More specifically, the lives of women who had traveled far, brought to be mail-order brides in this unforgiving corner of the American Old West. Among the crowd, John Silent Cooper, a rancher of few words and many calloused hands, watched with a mixture of apprehension and grim determination. His ranch, a handful of arid land and lean cattle, was on the verge of collapse. The relentless drought of recent years had decimated his herd and his hope. He needed help. He needed a wife who could not only share his life but also his burden, helping to keep the ranch afloat. The idea of buying a bride was for him a last, desperate resort. His gaze swept over the women being presented on the platform, their faces marked by weariness and uncertainty. They were like commodities, exposed to the curiosity and judgment of strangers. John felt a knot in his throat, a discomfort he tried to ignore. He didn't like this situation, but he saw no other way out. Then she appeared, Sarah Miller. Her blonde hair, tangled and dust-covered, framed a face that, even ravaged by the journey and fear, still radiated a delicate beauty. Her blue eyes, once vivid, were now dull with exhaustion and apprehension. She seemed small and fragile compared to the others, but there was a quiet resilience in her posture. The auctioneer's shrill voice echoed through the square, describing Sarah's qualities in a disrespectful, mercantile way. John felt a chill of anger. He observed the lecherous glances of some men, the obscene whispers. The air thickened with tension. Suddenly, a large, brutal man, known as Jebediah the Butcher Stone, a notorious local bully and landowner, raised his voice, his guttural laugh echoing menacingly. He made a high bid, accompanied by vile, humiliating comments about Sarah. The auctioneer, with a conniving smile, was about to bring down his gavel. John felt his blood boil. He couldn't allow this woman to fall into the hands of a man like Stone. In an impulse that surprised even himself, John raised his hand, his thick voice cutting through the air. $100. The amount was almost everything he had, the sacrifice of months of hard labor. The crowd fell silent, surprised. Stone shot him a hateful glare, but John stood firm, his gaze fixed on Sarah. Sarah's breath hitched. She looked at John, a stranger with a bearded face and intense eyes, and saw in him not salvation, but an unknown. The auctioneer's hammer came down with a dry thud. "Sold. To John Cooper." A murmur ran through the crowd. Stone snarled, swearing revenge with his eyes. John, meanwhile, felt a mix of relief and dread. He had won the bid, but now faced the reality of what that meant. He approached Sarah, who was visibly trembling. His heavy, rough hand lightly touched her shoulder. "Come on, miss. You're coming with me." In that dusty twilight, under the curious and judging eyes of the small town, John Cooper and Sarah Miller began their improbable journey. She, a woman scarred by the brutality of that auction, and he, a man fighting against the adversities of the West and his own solitude. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and prejudices, but at that moment, under the vast and merciless Arizona sky, a new and complex story began to unfold. The journey from Redemption Creek to John Cooper's ranch was a silent, tense affair. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the rugged landscape. Sarah sat stiffly beside John in the dusty wagon, the rhythmic creak of the wheels and the occasional snort from the horses, the only sounds breaking the oppressive quiet. Her body still trembled from the humiliation of the auction, and her mind raced, trying to process the sudden, drastic turn her life had taken. She stole glances at the man beside her, a silhouette against the fading light, his profile strong and unyielding. He had saved her from a terrible fate, yet he remained an enigma, a man of few words and a stoic presence that offered little comfort, but also no overt threat. John, for his part, was acutely aware of Sarah's presence. He could feel her fear, a palpable thing in the confined space of the wagon. His own thoughts were a tangled mess of anxiety about the ranch, the dwindling water supply, and now, this unexpected addition to his life. He wasn't accustomed to company, let alone the company of a woman who was now, by all legal means, his wife. The West was harsh, unforgiving, and he wondered if she, a seemingly delicate woman from the East, could truly adapt to the brutal realities of his existence. He felt a flicker of guilt about the circumstances of their union, but dismissed it quickly. There was no room for sentimentality here. Survival was the only currency. As they rode deeper into the wilderness, the landscape grew more desolate. Sparse cacti and scraggly brush dotted the horizon, their forms silhouetted against the deepening twilight. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant sagebrush. Sarah huddled closer to herself, her arms wrapped around her slender frame, as if to ward off not just the chill, but the vast loneliness of the land that stretched endlessly around them. She had imagined a new life, yes, but not one born out of such public indignity, nor one that led to such an isolated existence. Every bump in the road, every creak of the wagon, felt like a step further into an unknown, daunting future. Finally, as the moon began its ascent, casting a pale glow over the land, the silhouette of a small, ramshackle cabin appeared in the distance. This was John's ranch, his world. It looked even more isolated than Sarah had imagined, a lonely outpost against the vastness of the Arizona desert. As they drew closer, she could make out the lean-to corrals, the few scraggly cattle, and the general air of hardship that clung to the place. John reined in the horses, and the wagon came to a halt. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Sarah looked at the small, dark cabin, then back at John, her heart pounding. The journey was over, but the real test had just begun. The first rays of dawn painted the arid landscape in hues of soft orange and dusty gold, revealing the true harshness of John Cooper's ranch. Sarah woke in the small Spartan room John had indicated as hers, the rough canvas cot doing little to cushion her weary bones. The air was already thick with the scent of dry earth and distant dust. As she ventured out, she saw John already at work. His back stooped over a fence he was mending, his movements economical and strong. He wore the same worn clothes from the day before, and the dust of the ranch seemed to cling to him like a second skin. The silence between them persisted, a heavy, unspoken agreement to avoid the awkwardness of their forced union. John made sure she had food, a simple meal of dried jerky and stale bread, and pointed towards the well for water. There were no pleasantries, no gentle introductions to her new life. Instead, he simply outlined the tasks that needed doing: feeding the chickens, tending to a small, struggling garden, mending torn clothes, and maintaining the cleanliness of the cabin. Sarah, despite her initial apprehension, found herself moving with a quiet determination. She had always been resourceful, and the sheer necessity of the situation ignited a spark of resilience within her. She was not a woman to be easily broken, even if her spirit had been bruised. Days turned into weeks, marked by the relentless sun and the ever-present dust. Sarah worked tirelessly, her hands growing calloused, her skin tanned by the harsh sun. She learned to ration water, to identify the subtle signs of a coming dust storm, and to cope with the profound isolation. John remained a man of few words, their conversations limited to practical matters concerning the ranch. Yet, In their shared labor, a strange rhythm began to emerge. Sarah would see him struggling with a stubborn post, and without a word, she would bring him a tool he needed. He, in turn, would leave a freshly caught rabbit on the cabin porch, or ensure the water bucket was full before he left for the pastures. Despite the lack of verbal communication, Sarah began to observe John. She noticed the lines etched around his eyes, not just from the sun, but from a deeper weariness. She saw the way he treated his horses with a gentle hand and quiet respect. She witnessed his unwavering dedication to his land, even when it seemed to offer so little in return. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the initial fear she held towards him began to transform into something akin to understanding, perhaps even a nascent respect. He was not a cruel man, merely a hardened one, shaped by the unforgiving nature of the West. Their marriage might have been born of desperation, but a fragile, unspoken partnership was beginning to blossom amidst the dust and silence. The fragile peace that had settled over John and Sarah's ranch was shattered one sweltering afternoon by the thunder of approaching hooves. A cloud of dust billowed on the horizon, growing larger with alarming speed. John, who had been repairing a section of fence, straightened up, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung across his back. Sarah, who was hanging laundry, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. They both knew who it was, even before the distinct, cruel laughter echoed across the dry plains. Jebediah, the Butcher Stone, flanked by two of his rough, unkempt ranch hands, rode in with an air of malicious intent. Stone dismounted with a sneer, his eyes immediately finding Sarah. His gaze was possessive and menacing, a stark reminder of the humiliation she had endured at the auction. Well, if it isn't Cooper," Stone drawled, his voice thick with contempt. "Heard you got yourself a little prize. A pity that. I had plans for her." He took a step closer to Sarah, his eyes raking over her with an unsettling intensity. John stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Stone and Sarah. His face was a mask of granite, his hand never leaving the stock of his rifle. "She's my wife, Stone." John's voice was low, but carried an undeniable threat. The tension in the air crackled like static electricity. Stone's men shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their own holsters. Stone himself laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Wife, eh? You bought her, Cooper. Just like you'll buy your way out of this." He then revealed his true purpose. He claimed that John's cattle had strayed onto his land and destroyed his meager grazing pastures, demanding an exorbitant sum as compensation, far more than John could possibly afford. It was a thinly veiled attempt to seize John's ranch, or at the very least, cripple him financially. John knew it was a lie, a fabricated excuse to push him off his land, but he also knew that Stone held significant sway in Redemption Creek, and fighting him legally would be a losing battle. The confrontation escalated, words turning into threats, and the air grew heavy with the promise of violence. Sarah watched, her heart pounding against her ribs, a terrifying mixture of fear and defiance swirling within her. She saw the grim determination in John's eyes, the way his jaw was set, and for the first time she truly understood the depth of the challenges they faced together. As Stone finally turned and rode away, his parting words were a chilling promise. "This ain't over, Cooper. Not by a long shot." The dust from their departing horses settled, but the shadow of Jebediah Stone lingered, a dark omen hanging over their struggling ranch. The days following Jebediah Stone's visit were fraught with an unbearable tension. John worked with an increased urgency, his movements sharper, his gaze more distant. He knew Stone's threat was not empty. The man rarely made idle promises. Sarah, too, felt the weight of the impending conflict. The vast, empty landscape that had once felt so isolating now seemed to press in on them, a silent witness to their impending struggle. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks, John finally broke his usual silence. He spoke of his dwindling resources, the legal loopholes Stone would exploit, and the very real possibility of losing everything. It was a confession, not of weakness, but of the harsh reality they faced, a shared burden that finally found its voice. In that moment of vulnerability, something shifted between them. Sarah, seeing the burden he carried, felt a surge of resolve. She revealed her own hidden skills, a sharp mind for numbers, a knack for planning, and a surprising resilience born from her difficult past. She proposed a daring, unconventional plan, not to fight Stone in his own twisted legal arena, but to outmaneuver him, using the very land and the community against his malicious intent. It was a risky gamble, requiring them to unite the few honest folk in Redemption Creek and expose Stone's true nature, while simultaneously finding a way to ensure the ranch's survival. John, initially skeptical, listened intently, a flicker of hope igniting in his weary eyes. Her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering belief in a just outcome began to chip away at his hardened exterior. Their plan unfolded with meticulous precision. Sarah, using her keen observation skills, gathered evidence of Stone's shady dealings and past injustices, subtly engaging with sympathetic townsfolk. John, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to secure a vital water source, a long-forgotten spring on the far reaches of his land, a desperate measure that could provide them with leverage. They faced countless setbacks: sabotage from Stone's men, the skepticism of fearful neighbors, and the relentless pressure of time. There were moments of despair when the weight of their impossible task threatened to crush them. Yet each time one faltered, the other was there to offer a quiet word of encouragement, a shared glance of determination, or simply a steady presence that spoke volumes. The unspoken bond between them, forged in the fires of adversity, grew stronger with every obstacle they overcame. The climax arrived during a tense town meeting, orchestrated by John and Sarah with the help of the few brave individuals they had managed to rally. The dusty, hot hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation. John, with Sarah standing quietly beside him, presented the irrefutable evidence of Stone's deceit, revealing his true motives to the wary townsfolk. Sarah, despite her natural shyness, spoke with a clear, steady voice, her words painting a vivid picture of Stone's cruelty and the threat he posed to the entire community. Stone, enraged, tried to intimidate and discredit them, but the combined weight of their evidence and the quiet strength of their shared resolve was too much. The town, finally seeing the truth, turned against him. In the end, facing widespread condemnation and the threat of legal repercussions, Stone was forced to back down, his reign of terror broken. As the sun set on Redemption Creek, casting long shadows across the square, John and Sarah stood together, not just as a bought bride and a struggling rancher, but as partners, their future, once so bleak, now glimmering with the promise of a hard-won peace and a love that had blossomed amidst the dust and desperation of the Old West.